Welcome once again to the Brattlecast. I'm Jordan Rich along with Ken Gloss, the proprietor of the famous Brattle bookshop in Boston, one of the most exciting places you can visit when you come to the city, and there's so much going on, so much history and culture. And you talk about history, there's nothing more historic than a work by Sir Isaac Newton, a third edition of what book that you have here?
Well, this is Principia Mathematica. This book is the foundation of all modern mathematics. I don't know how Isaac Newton could have done this, but you have geniuses. And what we have is, it's not the first edition because, Jordan, quite honestly, I don't bring $1 million plus.
You'd be on your island enjoying a pina colada if you had
Well, you know, I'll tell a story about the first edition a little. I'll get into this one first. But this is the third edition. It's done in London in 1726. The first edition is the 1660s. So this is 50, 60 years later. It's in a beautiful binding that is originally from the 1720s. The paper is absolutely gorgeous. And one of the things you look for in books like this, a lot of times when they bind them, there's nice wide margins on the book.
I noticed that.
And a lot of times when you get them bound, the binders, to save on the amount of leather they had to use, they would trim down the book a little. But most of the time when you're talking about a first edition or someone's collecting, they want the first edition. Literally, the first edition of Principia Mathematica, cheap for a good copy, would be over $1 million. Now, I one time had, and this is still something that I tell people when we talk about rare books and things that I've got to hold, not owned. In Wellesley, there was a college that the founder of the college collected Isaac Newton material. He was wealthy. His name was Babson. And
sounds familiar.
Sounds familiar. But he had one of the best collections in the world of Isaac Newton that he collected in the early 1900s, late 1800s. And one of the things he had is a first edition of Principia Mathematica, Isaac Newton's copy with notes in the margin by Isaac Newton.
Oh, my gosh.
Now, I got to hold that book once. It was one of the things that you touch it, and you can almost feel the tingling and the electricity. Now, that book's not at Babson anymore. It went from Babson to MIT, and from MIT it went to the Huntington Library in Pasadena. So you can see it in a case in Pasadena now. I even went there and looked at the case and said, I don't think they'll let me touch it today. But we had a customer call us, a woman, a wife of a customer, call us recently, and she said, my husband collected science books. He was an entrepreneur, had customers. He studied mathematics, did a lot of financial algorithms and so on, which can be interesting. We have about 50 science books, and 50 books can be not so many. It can be a lot. It depends on what they were. And I asked her, which we normally do, well, is there anything in particular, special, whatever? And she said, well, we have a third edition of Principia Mathematica. And I immediately say, well, look, to myself, I said, look, even if it's not in good condition, even if the binding's ripped, even if there are some problems with the book, it's still a valuable book. And anybody who has that, probably some of the other books are good too. So she was local in about a 20-minute, half an hour drive from where we were. And we decided to go out. She had 50 books. They went all the way from the 1600s. Actually, there was some Galileo later editions, to actually some books even done in the 20th century on game theory and so on. Now, game theory is not exactly what everybody first, they weren't playing games, but they were dealing with the probability and the mathematics of probability, which led to computers and led to transistors and that science, which again is probably a few $1,000 book. This one is maybe 8 or 10 times that, but it made me, gee, yes, we've got to go out there. My manager said, can I come on this one? And we went out and looked and said, gee, they have 50 books.
What year are we talking in terms of this third edition? Do we know?
1726.
So
it's easy. It's on the book.
It's right on the book. So roughly 50 years earlier was first edition?
First the 1660s or 60 years earlier.
Right.
And there was a second edition also. But Isaac Newton is such a major thing. This is such a major book. You know, there aren't a lot of people who can afford to spend $1 million plus to get a first edition, but they still want to collect early books and editions of Isaac Newton. Now, in the $15,000 to $25,000 range, that's still a lot of money. I mean, you can't just say, oh, well, $1 million. It's still a lot of money, but a lot more people who are maybe own companies or entrepreneurs or whatever, they can spend that kind of money.
Sure, sure.
You know, it's...
Now, I'm not a math guy. I don't know if you are. You were in chemistry,
Yeah.
right, in school. But I'm far from math proficient. But basically, what does he lay out in the book, if you want to tell our listeners?
Well, what he lays out in the book, and it's a little hard to explain, but he basically invented calculus.
Right.
And what calculus does is it's a lot of motion, time, how things change from place to place in motion and time, which then allows you to have theories and symbols and figure out a lot of the dynamic world. And a lot of it is approximation, but the approximation becomes so infinitesimal that it's actually, you use it, and a lot of all the theories that you start first with calculus, and you start figuring out distances, how things work, how water runs through things, how it changes in time.
We know an apple fell on his head. So
an apple fell on his head. But if you think about it...
I'm just going to take a quick peek.
Sure. If you're pouring something out of a container, not only do you have it coming out of the container, but the weight and the size and what the container is holding changes with time. But as that weight changes, what changes with time changes. And he was doing this. Also, when you approximate the area and size of things like circles, it's not straight lines, so it's not that simple. And from these theories, which are in the book, what he did is a lot, and my wife used to say this when I talked about, I used to talk about math and science more. Now it's the historical aspect of it. But when you get to math and you look at the board, like an Einstein will be writing up, if you see a movie, and it's all squiggles and lines and symbols, and there's no numbers, that comes from Newton.
As difficult as math is for me, add on to the fact that it's done in Latin.
Well, this was done in Latin, but
did he write it in Latin originally?
Yeah, he wrote it in Latin.
Wow.
But you can get translation
English.
You
right.
can get
I don't know if that would help me much, but the Latin is amazing.
Well, I'll be quite honest. I studied chemistry. I was very good at it. The theoretical and the mathematics, that wasn't my high point. There are some people that can look at those equations and they can see the world before them. It wasn't for me. And I'll even say, I recently read a biography of Einstein, and I love the author. It's Isaacson. But one of the things that Einstein would say to some of the people that he was working with that he knew well, he came up with these ideas and theories and so on. But he says, well, I'm really not that good at the math. So he'd come up with it, but other people sometimes had to go to double check that, okay, this works. It doesn't work. He came up with the idea, but then you had to go to someone like Newton to do and say, oh, it works.
Great thinkers, as you say, you felt a tingle when you held that first edition, right? Because you're dealing with somebody who, in his time, was so far ahead of his time.
Well, not only a tingle holding that edition, but that edition that Isaac Newton, he held it.
Exactly.
That he wrote it.
Yeah.
That he added notes into it. Now, I'm thrilled that it still exists for researchers and scholars. It doesn't get held very often, I know that. But the fact that I can get a third edition, get it with some other scientific books. We have collectors coming in with, you never know what subject it is. And hopefully someone will buy it. I'm sure they will eventually. It might be someone who comes in and says, there's a professor at one of the big schools. He's a mathematician. What's a great gift to get him? It might be a CEO at a company that one of the people who work there, they want to get a retirement present or whatever. That might be it, and it just might be someone who says, I want to collect this. Now, one of the big advantages of this particular copy is a lot of times it isn't in great shape. The binding isn't perfect.
This is beautiful.
Well, and the binding is a contemporary, was done in the 1700s. A lot of times you'll get them with bindings done in the 1800s, 1900s, because they got worn away. The fact that the paper is all white is a big advantage. So all of that you look at, it goes into, gee, are you going to price it at this end of the price scale or that end of the price scale, or how do you think it goes? And then another thing that goes into it as a dealer is how long are you going to have it? How quickly do you want to turn it over so that you can buy something else that you can get excited about? But we just got this in about a week ago, and it's just, we enjoy it. I'll be sorry to see it go, but I won't be too sorry to see it go.
Well, one more thing. They didn't use dust jackets back then.
No, actually,
or did they?
Well, actually, what they did back then, no, they didn't use dust jackets as we know them. Dust jackets as we know them, well, they started in the early 1800s, but they were literally plain pieces of paper that just covered to keep the dust off.
Right.
Around World War I, when manufacturing and paper and machines could make dust jackets, that's what we really know. What would happen with a book like this in many cases, though, is it actually wouldn't come out necessarily in a leather binding. It would come out with a very plain paper binding, maybe almost not cardboard, but the equivalent to the period. Very, very simple, plain, because whoever was buying this, the publisher, assumed they had their own binder. And then they would take it to their binder, and they would have whatever binding.
Custom binding, and it could be very ornate in that regard.
Exactly, or
Nice.
it could have their
Family seal or something. Yeah.
So it was almost assumed that the binder would do it individually. So when I said it's a contemporary binding, it's not like the publisher put this binding on 100 copies of the book. Probably this is the only one that's exactly like this, because whoever bought it back at that time put their own binding on it.
Something I never would have known, our listeners would not have known had I not made a crack about dust jackets.
Well, one of the things that also is fun about this is people ask me, well, you must know everything. And I say, no, I don't know everything, nor do I want to, because if you knew everything, it would get really boring.
Yeah.
There's always something new to come in, to learn. Now, I would imagine with this binding, you could start doing research on who the binder might have been, go into depth. It isn't going to make a big difference in the value in this case. So I probably won't have anyone spending hours doing that research, but you could probably track it down to a point. Now, if this binding was filled with jewels or something like that, which some of the bindings were, well, then you do a lot more research on that. But you have to be practical, too. It's a business.
Indeed it is. It's a fascinating business at that. Third edition, Isaac Newton, Principia, Mathematica. Did I say it right?
Exactly. And let me just say, if anyone out there has a first edition, I'm interested.
Okay. Ken is just a delight to be with. And when he comes into the studio, there's always a look of glee on his face. And I don't have any idea what you're going to pull out of your bag of tricks, but this was a great one.
It's a lot of fun. And some people think when I do like this that I've been preparing and all that.
No.
No, about 2 hours before I get in my truck to come out to your studio,
listen.
I go, oh, okay, let's do this one, that one.
I never know what you're going to bring in. I'm as surprised as anybody. Hey, folks, thanks for listening. Don't forget you can write to Ken, send an email from the website, and you can decide you want to hear a particular topic that we can discuss. We'll do it.
Or even if it's something not for the podcast,
Sure.
but just something you want to know about, I'd be happy to do that too.
All right. Thanks for listening. This has been the Brattlecast.